This guy fixed his Les Paul in a interesting way. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. It's a tale as old as time. Somebody has a cherished, beautiful Gibson Les Paul, and they break it. Now, sometimes the story is, the darn cat knocked it off the stand. Disgruntled spouse. Other times, FedEx. Or maybe just plain carelessness at a gig. Now that I've scarred you for life with these crazy photos, that probably should have came with some sort of a warning. It's time for me to tell you, these can be repaired. Sometimes a repair looks like this. You can still see a faint line. They didn't do any finish touch-up. They just glue it and clamp it. A more modern take on fixing these is with wooden splines. You actually route out the neck even further, which looks really strange and crude at first. But then once you've sanded it all down, you've joined the headstock together with not only the wooden pieces, but really deep wooden joins. And when done right, these can be very pretty repairs, especially with a little bit of finish touch-up. Other times you have to get a little bit more creative with grafting things. It all just depends on how bad the break was, and if you want to add a volute to it or not, and how skilled you are. But our main feature for this topic tonight had a different approach to it. At first glance, okay, Les Paul standard. Nothing too crazy. Honestly, it looks like one of the more modern ones. Not something vintage that could not necessarily be replaced. But yeah, here's our headstock. Okay, where do we begin? It appears they've made an epoxy outline of the Gibson headstock and reattached it to a guitar that no longer had the other piece. At first anyways, because when you get to the back, you can actually see some other stuff, like the remnants of a serial number, 03 something. So that means this was built in the 2000s, very late in the year of whatever year that was within that decade. And you can just barely make out a 4 of something. So this means the guy had the original headstock at one point in time and used it to make a mold out of epoxy and then decided to join that on to the existing wood, probably with the theory that that might be stronger because glue is stronger than the initial wood. I don't know if that's necessarily true for epoxy or not, but he decided to throw in some nails in here too. It's almost like he did that to help secure it into place. Because if you look, you've got epoxy coating right here. So it might be that he sank these screws into the existing wood and then laid the whole thing in a box that had the mold and set it up that way. I'm really impressed how he put the Gibson logo somehow back on it. It's possible that's like laser etched and then you put like another layer of it on there. But imagine if that was like polished up and nice and clear. That would be kind of a cool effect. You just got to clean it up a little bit over here first to put a truss rod cover on it. But currently it has been strung up with new tuners. They decided to do a 3-and-3 on there. 3 locking clusins in all ebony and then 3 of the more vintage style like what you would have originally found on this. But the rest of the guitar, I mean, it seems okay. Generally speaking, how much is a 2000s era Les Paul standard worth? Probably in like that $1,600 to $2,500-ish range, depends on finish and condition. So a good headstock repair usually devalues a guitar by about half. So realistically, I would say a well-repaired one probably worth between $1,200 and $1,800, depending on a few factors. Like this one, it's got a decent top, but honestly, if you would have told me this was a 50s original collection standard, I would have believed you. So the next thing is to figure out, is this even an authentic Gibson? Is it a Gibson that somebody just did this to the headstock to make him think it's real? From what I see, I don't think you have any worries. This looks authentic to me. You've got the fret nibs, you've got the correct style bridge, you've got the right plastics, the pickups are looking okay, but most importantly, the construction, the wood styles. That's especially true for the back. I think you're good here. So how much is the seller asking? $720 and $80 shipping. It's called Epoxy Gibson Les Paul. If you want to buy this, there's a channel supporting affiliate link in the description as well as in the pinned comment. But his story is the guitar was missing its headstock, so he tried to make it out of epoxy and nails. So, interesting. Maybe he made the mold out of a different Les Paul? Is he saying he thinks it's a Gibson Les Paul Classic or Standard? I never really thought about the possibility of that not being the original headstock. At the very least, somebody's upgraded the electronics here. Unless it is a modern day one, we'd have to look at the pickup cavities to see what kind of markings are in there and what pickups might still be in it. But he says it tunes and plays, but he's not going to guarantee it. AIP, good job. You've listed it fairly, and you're being honest with people. That's exactly how I do business too, and how I would sell this exact same guitar. It works now, but it's an untraditional repair, so it's good to put it in their head that, yeah, you might need to do something eventually. But he said he's had it tuned to C, so that's important to note, that he's not had this up to full pitch, but he's had it to C for a year. Quite refreshingly and honestly, he says it doesn't hold tune well. I bet that comes down to the strings. You probably need some heavier gauges to hold up C tuning. However, at the same time, maybe the headstock angle wasn't right. You could have some nut issues. There's a lot of things that could be at play here. I suppose if you were to take a straight edge and line it up, it does appear that the headstock might be, lifting slightly forward. But he does say it could one day just snap off, and that's why he's listing it as non-functional. Whatever reason, it's interesting, and I'm glad he shared it. But the best way to think about something like this is think of the part out value. How much is just this body with the neck removed worth? I would say, $200 to $300. The electronics, depending on what's in there, you might have another $200 there. So even on the low end, that's $400. Is the neck really worth anything? You might be able to salvage the fretboard, but even that's maybe a $50 risk at best. So your part out value, but between $450 to $600. So that's what I would personally suggest offering the seller for the guitar. That protects you if everything goes wrong and you don't know how to do anything to fix it. However, to the right guy looking for a project that knows how to replace a neck or perform a miracle repair here, maybe this could be worth it to them. It's hard to find a good quality project out there. Next up, along similar lines, here's a 1983 335 Custom Shop in antique white. Now, if you were to ask me if this was stage 3 or stage 4, personally, I would call it stage 3. All this finish checking's really kind of cool, especially with how ambered over everything else is. But the filled in holes in the top really kind of ruined the vibe of this particular one. But at first I was like, yeah, those are Bigsby holes, whatever. But then I realized, nah, that's MIDI holes. Somebody had one of those synth pickups mounted there, and it has this little black box down here. Those darn MIDI things ruin so many cool guitars. But look at all that checking. It's not traditional by any means, but it is very unique. You would always know your guitar. But this one also teaches us an interesting lesson. Touching up white guitars is a pain in the butt, because I bet at one point in time this was a perfect match. But as the finish continues to age, now that off-white is looking very obvious. So exposed holes aren't necessarily ideal, but it could be an option for someone. But the back completely matches. This one's definitely seen some smoky bars, and most significantly, some changes in temperature being left in a car or something. But look at this. Custom Shop Edition looks really cool on this. It's also marked a second. And then we've got these strange SS brandings on the tuners, but his name appears to be Sal Santiago. That's kind of cool. So those are his initials. Nothing else. Don't read any more into that. That's crazy. He would brand his tuners to not be stolen. But look at that headstock. That is beautiful. This one would certainly have some stories to tell, but it's kind of starting to look like cheese on this side. Well, what a cool guitar. So here's a 1971 offered by Samp Life. It wouldn't be too bad of a price, but yeah, somebody routed it for a Kahler. Poor guitar. You see them get chewed up all the time in the 70s and 80s, but to see an early one, before the introduction of the Kahler, because this was installed on it because it was once just a used guitar that was cheap and somebody wanted to try a Kahler. And you know what? Maybe it's fun. I'm not a big fan of Kahlers, but I don't really like trem systems in general. But remember, you can always take a Kahler off. You're going to have a big gaping hole underneath there, but you can just put a stop bar tailpiece on it as well as a regular bridge. So if you can get one for a good enough of a price, don't be too scared of them. However, a lot of people do feel routing that much wood out of the body sucks out the tone, so there's also that thought process. But I'll leave you guys tonight with one last one from 1985, listed at $3,000 from D-Town Guitar. Someone's picking wore straight through the finish right there, revealing the bare mahogany. which is kind of cool because the first 2 years of these had alder bodies, so that exposes an interesting later wood choice. But as we zoom out on this photo, you're going to see the other reason why I saved it. It's one of the Flying V XPLs, and it's a stop bar tailpiece. This is a very hard to find configuration. We might associate it more so with Dave Mustaine nowadays, but this was, one of those experimental guitars. XPL series meant you put the Explorer headstock on all the other guitars, including the Les Paul, like in the Aldo Nova episode. I wouldn't mind one of these in my collection, but this one, unfortunately, just not the overall condition I was hoping for, but most of them do have the Kahler, so beggars can't necessarily be choosers. So if you are a Flying V XPL collector, yes, there are people out there, I know of at least one, who's trying to go for a complete set. This might be an option for you. But alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.